Everyone here has had a different journey with Kay and a different personal journey, and it might, and see what comes up. So I was, the videos I showed you regarding identity and image just, for whatever reason, struck me as kind of crucial and just fundamental, our own image of ourself and how that hurts us or how that inhibits us. So I just kind of wanted to maybe explore that along that nature, but it's whatever comes up, whatever is here. So I don't know, any opening thoughts, comments? Something?
So I don't know, I'll start something. I love the second, I love both videos. The second one was kind of spoke to me as I, in my 30s, early 30s, became a holistic healthcare practitioner and refused to put any certification titles behind my name. I didn't want to be identified as that. And I just kept saying, I'm so much more than certified massage therapist, nutritionist, yoga instructor, blah, blah, blah. And it was so funny because I had all these friends that kept taking workshops so they could add more initials, second lines to their, I just didn't get that. And I said, well, you're so much more than that. Why would you want to put yourself in that box? Because as soon as you do have a title behind your, name, there's a story that's created about who you possibly could be. So that really resonated with me about, how we identify ourselves, lack of identity or wanting to identify.
Almost that's the same as transcending your ego or something. I felt that was like the basis of a lot of people, psychological freedom, is transcending yourself and your ego and rising above kind of this mindless mass culture and stuff.
Right.
It is mindless, and you really have to see it as what it is.
Right.
And then you can create some kind of freedom for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about the mindless mass culture icon, okay? Because I always tell people, you gotta be like SpongeBob. No, you can't punch SpongeBob. There was, and I only saw like one episode that my kid said, Dad, you gotta watch SpongeBob. So I watched this SpongeBob, and this bully was going to beat up SpongeBob, but he can't punch SpongeBob.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and I always use that example. I said, you gotta let go of this idea that you're holding so hard onto, and just, not be hurt by it, or not let it affect you. You gotta be SpongeBob.
But do you really not get hurt? I mean, is it actually possible to not be hurt?
For me, it is.
Really?
Sure, try to hurt me.
Well, that's what Krishna was speaking
Yeah.
about, being hurt, about being called an idiot. If there's no self to respond, or you're rise above yourself, then whoever calls you or whoever you are just has no effect on you.
That's true. I have not risen beyond myself. That's the thing, to be perfectly honest,
Well,
right?
it's a long journey.
It is. So I guess that's what I'm curious. If you seem to have that
I wouldn't
understanding.
say that I've risen beyond myself, but the one thing I think I've learned from Krishnamurti's work for me personally was, when he talks about, how do you break free, or how do you get beyond that,
Yeah.
whatever it is to become intensely aware of it, and then it just, when you become aware, I think he says, aware of the totality of it, and how it impacts everything about your world and your life, and then it's almost not a factor anymore, because you realize how ridiculous it is, and you realize, how the effects that it's having, and then you drop it. Why would you hang on to something that was that destructive or that unlovely or that, so you just drop it. Just your sheer awareness of it sort of dissipates the energy. It allows me to transcend it.
Yeah.
People compliment us. We always say, whatever you see in me is only possible because it's in you already. You can only see the contents of your own consciousness. So if you see something that you find appealing in me, it's really because it's alive in you. So congratulations. Because you're really connecting with me in order for me to reveal. I love Krishnamurti. I use his quotes all the time. One of my favorites is his whole idea about relationship, and it's either a form of self-gratification, hello, our world, or it's a process of self-revelation. In other words, my relationship with you is telling me something about me. And that's the whole purpose for its existence to me. And so what am I learning from it? What's it reflecting back to me, you know? And then that's my work.
This gentleman is bringing up a very good point about the difficulty. And I've been following Krishna Ji for over 40 years. Coming to realize it's a daily meditation. I don't really graduate, I don't have all these titles behind my name. I don't get out of university and say I'm done. I don't reach my doctorhood and say I'm done.
Yeah.
It's like my spiritual master said, I'm done when I take my last breath, but I want to be there. So it's being aware. And the difficulty is, for me, always, you know, if something comes up, when anything comes up that challenges my ego, is am I centered enough to not react? And that's what Krishna Ji talked about, reaction. I think one of the greatest things, like he said a few things that was very powerful. And he said that when I see, that is everything. Although, in other words, he's not reacting to the situation. The very seeing is the doing. So that for me was one of the most profound things. And he says when you actually have an awareness, it changes your brain cells. Literally.
What sprang to my mind immediately was the Hindu myth of Ganesh, who is the remover of obstacles. And most of the major Hindu gods have a vehicle, right? They have some sort of animal that's associated with them. And for Ganesh, it's a mouse. And I was speaking with a lady just the other day, and I couldn't remember for the life of me what the mouse represented. And it's important because he rides it, this, you know, elephant figure riding this mouse. And it stands for the ego. And I don't think it's about so much about dissolving the ego as being aware of our limitations all the time and questioning that, keeping it in line.
I found that your video is quite interesting because I think we all, the people who are here, just listening to what you're saying, we've all read Kay and we've
Right.
sort of studied it for a long time. But the ideas generally, like you asked those people about psychological freedom, and at first, just the concept, what does it mean?
Yeah.
Those words coming
Right.
together, it's so
Yeah, great
meaningless.
stuff.
And it takes a bit of a twist there, what is he talking about? But here, you are on the street, and they're standing there, there's a camera looking at them.
Right.
Yeah.
As if it's gonna be on TV or something, and then, I guess you gotta think and come up with an answer. But it's interesting because it's a way of just putting a question into someone's mind, and maybe they can't answer it right then and there, but probably they'll think about it for the next half an hour, even after you're gone. I mean, it's the beginning of when you're just implanting a question like a seed in someone's mind, and let it do the work, right? Instead of somebody
Yeah, I
else.
think that's what your videos are more about, not so much as having evidence of people's thoughts, but making them think after things.
Right. I don't know, it's interesting because when we speak about reactions and ego, the most difficult reaction, well, the reaction that gives me most trouble is not anger, it's in fact grief. I don't know what to do with grief. I don't know how to look at grief. I don't know how to be secure in my grief. I don't know how to be aware of it. It overpowers me and I feel that I don't have control. So I go into this spin of knowing that I don't have control but want to control, and it's almost more destructive. So I guess it's one of those places I find myself in that I can't I can't get out of, you know. I don't know how to look at it.
Grief and sorrow is a process.
Is a process, you
It's a
said?
process. It's something I don't get out of. Something is like cellular. It's sorrow. Something deep in the heart. It's touched me very deeply. I'm in grief. I'm sorrow. So I need to process that. It's not something I just pick up and say, I don't want it. It needs, someone dies very close to me. I see something horrendous happening. It touches me very deeply. So the process is to process it. And then it becomes its own.
Part of it is physical too.
Physical.
Yeah,
Oh,
there's such a thing as a grief hormone.
A grief
Hormone.
hormone.
It's a chemical that gets released in the brain that causes the mood change. And if that chemical is present, even without any experience, you will have the same emotional reaction. So there's a time limit that chemical is present in which you can do nothing, as he's saying. You can do nothing.
Mhm.
It just goes through its emotions.
Process.
But what you can do is add to it.
Add to, yes.
Emotionally, by your reactions, you can keep that hormone being injected and keep that, extend that process. Or let it, whatever, you can't do anything about that natural process, but it can end, and it'll end quicker and faster and be over.
I
But we
think
generally add to it with more worry, more thoughts, more concerns, more whatever it is. We put
It's a
more.
natural process. They,
Mm.
scientifically, the humans are the only species that produces a certain chemical when we cry. And in those tears is a healing process. So you can Google it or look it up, but very scientifically, humans are the only ones who produce this particular chemical in tears. So when we cry, we're processing.
Really?
Oh yes,
Oh my gosh.
it's a process.
Right.
On every level.
Yeah.
On every level, physically, emotionally, psychically, I mean, there's not this particular, it's the holistic process.
I think it's just to add to that, it's a matter of acceptance and being patient with yourself and patient with the process and not
Yes.
getting frustrated, just kind of letting yourself move through it.
Being aware,
Right. Right.
not interfering. That's what Krishnamurti is saying, is, it's so simple and it's so complicated for us. It's just, the very seeing is the doing. And, he says some very powerful things that for 40 years echo, and I'm still processing it. That's why I call it a daily meditation. It never finishes.
But have we gotten to what the cause of grief is?
That's a great question.
I think it's one of the opportunities that he seems to be offering is that that watching is enough. That if we really learn how to watch grief, not to get out of it, that it reveals something about it. And it reveals more than it may reveal. For instance, I remember in an epilogue to a book, I think it was called The Reluctant Messiah, he's talking with somebody who's lost a brother, and he's talking about his grief for his brother. And Kay asked him, which brother are you missing? The brother that gave you pleasure, or the brother that you had the arguments with, or the brother that might be mixing up that reference with another book. But so Kay seems to be starting from a place where inviting us to look at the reality of the self, and we want to start from a place where we accept the self, and we're trying to use whatever we can find, whether in the teachings or somewhere else, to make that experience better or less painful. So there's something. It's part of the trick here, I think, is that we have to find out how to start in freedom. That's one of the challenges or opportunities, or invitations that he's making available to us.
Well, it seems to me that part of what Michael was getting into was that when you actually remain with grief, when you remain with what that movement is, not even with the word grief, but what the movement is, can that take you to the root of it? Do we ever do that? Do we ever stay with the grief and not try to dissipate it or change it into something else? Can we stay with it to see if we can actually get to the root? Does the staying with it take one through whatever the labyrinth is?
It almost sounds like a contradiction, the way Michael put it. There's a sense of fixing oneself, being aware of the grief in order to fix oneself. And there's a sense of not really doing all that, but just watching the process. My question is, what are you watching? If it isn't the attempt to fix, the attempt to use grief to learn about grief or be aware. Because if the natural response, if where we find ourselves is something happens, start grieving, start thinking, suffering, being aware of the suffering, if you've read Kay or something. So awareness becomes your thing now. But this is what you're doing. This may be the fact for you. This may be the what is for you. So my question is, what are you watching? When you say stay with the grief, isn't it watching that entire process of reaction to it? Whether it's fixing it, whether it's being aware of it, whether it's
Yes.
running away from it, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that's why, Rhonda, it's the same problem, right? Because when you then have the Krishnamurti idea, that, oh, I should just stand back and watch it, and then that will give me the result I want.
Right.
So it's always
Well,
the same, it's always
that's
starts
very
from the same
dangerous
problem.
to get a result.
Yeah, but that too
But that's ultimately what you
falls
want.
into the same,
The result.
right?
Yeah.
So the question is, what does it mean to watch?
Right.
That's the
Right,
question.
right.
When he said, sit and watch, I thought, oh, perfect.
Well, I'm not aware, what's the contradiction here though that you mentioned, because I'm not seeing it.
What Michael was pointing to.
Yeah, that seems to be consonant with what I see, so.
Right, so, but the question then, Rex was saying that to just be able to watch it, watch grief. So my question is, what are you watching? If not the movement of your mind in response to grief,
Sure.
right? So the movement of the mind though is all that self-correcting.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Was trying
No,
to
it
fix
may not be, but it might be.
It may be, so you have to make a distinguish between seeking and making a genuine, pure inquiry.
But this is my question, what is this genuine pure inquiry?
Well, that's where the negation, right, comes in and is not seeking, it is not something in which you're trying to overcome, but as Rex pointed out, perhaps if one were to give attention, you would come upon the root naturally, right?
But how do you give attention to something without trying to fix it? I mean, how are you looking at your grief without wanting to not be in pain?
You simply become aware that you're trying to do that.
But you see, the trying to do it is all this stuff, the thinking, right, there's a trying.
Yeah.
Is that what we're watching? What the thoughts are doing?
It seems to bring you to a point where you more and more seriously look at why you want any result at all.
Yeah, like why think of something if you're not trying to solve it? Because thinking of it is trying to solve that. You don't want to just sit there with the grief inside, knowing the root will not solve it.
This was the suggestion, right? That if you got to the root, it would vanish.
But it's not that suggestion.
I've actually lost 3 friends in the last 365 days. It's been a really rough year for me and my friends. And I have been through this before, so I know a fair amount about the grief process and what I need to do for myself. But I see my friends who are oftentimes younger really struggle with it. I mean, they really get lost in it. And then they start beating themselves up for feeling badly. And what I have come to tell them is that you have to let yourself be okay with not being okay. It's an acknowledgement and an acceptance. And once you finally are done sitting with that pain, then you move on and you find a way to honor what that person meant to you. I mean, no one can tell you, the timing on that or how long you need to just sit with it versus when you need to take the next step. But I do think there's a 2-step process there. You acknowledge it and then you make it into something bigger than just ego.